what we will be looking at now is this session which we are calling They Wrote the Elections. We have a very fantastic panel of journalists, women journalists, from diverse backgrounds, women who've covered elections from 1984 onwards, to two women who are covering elections from very different perspective, from a gender lens, from a caste lens, all very important aspects that that need to be covered. January onwards, we've all been so excited, preoccupied, like some of our energies have been out by this whole month and a half long campaign in 5 states, starting from Uttar Pradesh to Manipur to Goa to, and every year, what fascinates me about India is that every year, at least 4 or 5 states go in for elections, not to talk about the every 5 years, India goes in for general elections. But beyond all of that, every other month or year, we have local level elections, which we hardly ever talk about, really. So with elections being such a widespread affair in the country, which is almost like, there are names for it, like Jashne elections, and like the dance of democracy and so on, as exciting as they are, but they're also very exhausting affairs, both for the campaigners, for the political parties, for bureaucrats who conduct these elections, for journalists who cover these elections. But what I always feel is that, as tired as we are about the whole exercise of elections, I think personally, myself, but also a lot of other people that are the journalists, women journalists I speak with, I think the most we are tired about is how elections are largely an all-male affair. I've been watching elections since Doordarshan days, where we had male psephologists, male analysts, male reporters, and so on. And I think I'm very willing to learn what Smita has to say from her time in reporting elections from 1984. And what we have seen is that these women hardly ever featured in these elections as any form of subjects, right? And over the years, I do think that some of that narrative has shifted, especially with a lot of initiatives coming in, which are either women-led. We have the fantastic, legendary Khabar Lahariya, which really kind of drove that revolution, which is now the stuff of legends of Oscars, if you like. And then we have globally also, we have organizations. We have in India, we have Shades of Rural India, led by Neetu Singh. In some ways, Behan Box is also doing the same sort of work, where we're trying to put the gender lens on everything, on public policy, laws, etc., and how they affect women and gender diverse persons. But globally also, there are a lot of initiatives like the 19th News, the Fuller Project, so many others in Latin America that are really taking matters into their own hands, because they are sort of a little they're quite disappointed with how the gender lens has been missing from everything, and especially from elections. And I've seen the narrative myself change from, we started to talk about women's representation and how abysmally poor it is during the elections. And what I think that needs to change, and this is a topic of discussion really, is how else can we make issues around the gender issues, especially around elections, much more important, much more central, and much more focused, especially given that women are equal, if not more, as voters. We saw in Manipur, women in these elections, women outnumbered men as electorate. So given all of that, how do we see that change, and what lessons does that change have going forward into 2019 elections? So this really will be the agenda for this session, where we put the gender lens back on elections. We are calling this they wrote elections, by talking about how women have been covering elections. And this name really is inspired by a poem written by Urvashi Butalia, especially for the for the NWMI 20th anniversary events. Do check out that poem on the Solidarity Hall in the venue. What I also would like to say is that because we have a very diverse panel, मैं कोशिश नहीं, मैं ये जरूर करूंगी कि ये पैनल इंग्लिश और हिंदी दोनों बाइलिंगुअल कर सके, रख सके, ताकि सभी को पॉइंट समझ में आ सके. So without further ado, may I just introduce our fantastic panelists who are part of this panel. First, we have Smita Gupta. Smita Gupta is a senior journalist who has been an associate editor at The Hindu and also worked with organizations like Outlook India, Indian Express, Times of India and Hindustan Times. And like I said, what fascinated me about Smita's bio is that she has been covering, she has covered all major and majority of minor political parties, the Prime Minister's office, and a range of social development ministries, and every general election from 1984 to 2019. And this is something, and she's an author of several books, and a fellow at the Reuters Center at the Oxford University. So welcome, Smita. Thank you so much for joining us. दूसरे पैनलिस्ट हैं कविता देवी. अभी कविता देवी को कौन नहीं जानता, लेकिन मैं फिर भी उनकी बायो पढ़ के सुनाना चाहूंगी. She is the co-founder and editor-in-chief of Khabar Lahariya. She's a Banda local herself, and she likes to call herself Kavita Bundelkhandi, having chosen to drop her last name deliberately many years ago. She's also the region's first Dalit woman anchor to host her own news and views weekly. And she's the only Dalit member of the Editors Guild of India. And she's also been a TED speaker. And I mean, there are so many things to her credit. Ninglun Hangal is a freelance journalist based in Imphal. She's the recipient of the Ladli Media Fellow 2020. Ninglun is a former Delhi correspondent of the Sangha Express, a Manipur-based daily newspaper. And at present, she's the consulting editor of the Northeast Stories, an online e-magazine. I've been following Ninglun's work on women's representation during the Manipur elections. She writes for various media outlets like The Hindu, Business Line, Money Control, Statesman, East Mojo, among others. And we have a very interesting Babita Gautam. Babita is a journalist and the founding editor of The Voice Media. She's been working in the field for almost 6 years, and she's before this, it's one of the Voice Media is one of the up and coming portals that talks about that's very Ambedkarite and talks about a lot of from a Bahujan point of view. So she's worked with National Dastak, Nivan Times, Daily Hunt, and the Mook Nayak. And last but not the least, definitely, is Kavita Muralidharan. She's a bilingual journalist from Tamil Nadu, and she's got 2 decades of experience working on a range of issues from politics to culture to cinema. And she's worked with the News Today, the Hindu Group, to India Today, and The Week. She is a contributing writer for the People's Archive of Rural India. And she's also has a poetry and collection of essays in Tamil to her credit, and she's translated anonymous woman's blog writings on Iraqi war into Tamil, and more recently she's translated and she had post-translated Perumal Murugan's Amma into English, which was published by Westland. So I'm just to reintroduce myself, I'm Bhanupriya Rao. I'm the founder of Behan Box, and I've been working on the area of open data and right to information and such issues across globally. So I would really like to jump off into the discussion with so Smita, basically I wanted to start off, मैं आपसे शुरू करना चाहूंगी कि आपने, जैसा हमने बायो में देखा कि आपने 1984 से हर इलेक्शन को कवर किया है आज तक, तो आपके हिसाब से, आपके नजरिए से इन इलेक्शन कवरेज में आपने क्या क्या डिफरेंस देखा है तब में और अब में, स्पेशली थ्रू अ जेंडर लेंस, और आप अपने एक्सपीरियंसेस के द्वारा अगर इस बात पे नजर डालें तो बेहतर रहेगा.
Thank you so much, Bhanupriya, for that introduction, and congratulations to the NWMI on its 20th anniversary. To get down to the subject of this panel discussion, when we talk about looking at things through a gender lens, when I look back at my career, which which started in 1979 when I was 21, there's a kind of surreal feeling, because far from looking at things through a gender lens, at that time it was hard enough to get your foot into the doorway for a woman. In 79, I joined the Hindustan Times as a trainee sub-editor. And in those days, it was hard enough to be accepted as a reporter, and even harder to be assigned a political beat. Women were accepted as sub-editors and feature writers, writing on what were described in those days as soft issues. Whereas the world of politics, elections, conflict reporting was seen as combat roles best left to men. I was a full-time journalist for 38 years, and I worked largely in the mainstream media and largely in what would be described today as a legacy media. So you can see how ancient I am. The advantage, of course, was that these newspapers had a big reach, wide reach, because for the better part of my career, there was no social media to amplify any work that we did. But that didn't make the task of being a woman journalist any easier, even though I had security, which a lot of freelancers don't have, and which I, in my post-retirement phase, am facing. The kind of security that goes with a job in the mainstream media, which is a huge problem for many, many journalists today, both men and women. But as a woman, to make the cut, you had to constantly work much harder because you were judged by standards that were much higher than those that were set for men. You had to push your way forward. At this stage, I think I would like to mention 5 women journalists, 2 of whom are leading lights of the NWMI, without whose mentorship and example, I would not be the journalist I became. They lit the path I walked on. First, there was Deena Vakil and Kalpana Sharma, who by turns edited Express magazine for the 5 years I was there. Then came Amrita Abraham, my immediate boss at the Indian Post, and Amu Joseph, the magazine editor at the paper. And then Kumi Kapoor, my boss at the Independent. They taught me, they pushed me, they believed in me. They were the ones who gave me the breaks, even my break as a political journalist. How that happened was actually very interesting. A male political reporter was unacceptably rude to our common boss, a woman. Naturally, she could not accept that erosion of her authority. So she took him off his beats and offered them to me, the fledgling Janta Dal in 1987, a party that became the core of the National Front in 89 and won the general elections. That set my feet firmly on a career primarily as a political journalist. And I can't thank Kumi Kapoor enough for that. Even then, it wasn't easy because when I joined, when I started covering the Janta Dal, many male reporters would say in my hearing that women were did not understand politics, and that they would not be able to, they would find it extremely hard to kind of forge the sort of relationships with politicians, largely male, of course, that would yield stories. But I have to say, in defense of many of my male colleagues, that many of my male bosses were equally helpful. They also mentored and helped me learn the skills of the profession. But to these 5 women, I owe a special tribute. I'd now like to tell you about the first election that I covered. No one offered me that assignment. It was 1984 and I was working in the Indian Express. And my colleague Vidya Subramaniam, whom you must have also heard of, who also retired from the Hindu as an associate editor, and I were feeling extremely frustrated that here was everybody rushing off to cover elections while we were, just hanging around the office. So we both went to the resident editor and asked to be allowed to help cover the elections. We told him that the paper needs spend only on what it would spend on one reporter. So for the price of a first-class train ticket, we offered to travel second class and so on. He agreed, and off we went on what seemed like the biggest adventure in our life till then. The Lok Sabha constituency of Wardha, famous for its association with Gandhi. We spent 5 days there and covered what seemed to be every angle of the election. We wrote half a dozen stories, and to our utter surprise, all of them were printed in full. In 1984, I was given half a constituency to cover, but over the next 35 years, the newspapers that I worked at sent me to UP, Bihar, Gujarat, and West Bengal in particular, and occasionally to Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh to cover elections. But when it came to whether issues other than political reporting figured in election covering in gender terms, the answer is really not much. For one thing, the newspapers I worked at assigned certain constituencies or states to reporters and left it to us how we wish to cover the elections. There would be some general discussion on how the election period, because that is usually one time when newspaper managements are a little freer with the money they spend on reportage, could be used to study the impact, say, of welfare schemes and scrutinize whether governmental programs were making an impact. If an area had been affected by communal violence or rape with far-reaching consequences, this would also be flagged as a possible area for study. Classic election-style reports were expected, constituency profiles, campaign reports, and so on. But over the years, I think, through a period of osmosis, and possibly because of an increasing number of women who are now beginning to cover elections, the scope of election reporting widened. Women began to feature in election stories, of course, largely when they were politicians and candidates themselves, or when they were beneficiaries of some government scheme, Labhartis, as the present government describes them, or when they were victims of some atrocity. But here, if I could just pause for a moment and tell you why women don't feature as much in election stories, just as they don't feature that much in any form of reporting. The answer is very simple. It is harder. For instance, if you're reporting from a rural area or a Mofussil town, unless it is a subject that directly concerns women, journalists, male and female, tend to ignore women because it is simply harder to talk to them. Ask a woman a question, and more often than not, she will direct you to her brother, husband, or father, because that is what they have been taught. Men do the talking. They know about elections, agricultural practices, the police, cases of riots, how a government scheme is working, or whatever may be the subject. Most of these women actually lack the self-esteem to understand that their point of view matters. And not just that, that it need not coincide with what the men are thinking. Two, even women from a particular family may have different opinions. This is not about an election, but I think it's still relevant to the subject. I realized this for the first time while reporting on the aftermath of a riot in Meerut in Uttar Pradesh in 1990. I was driving through the narrow streets of the curfew-bound town when I saw some women peeping out from behind the windows. On an impulse, I stopped, rang the bell, explained who I was, and asked whether I could speak to the women. The response, there were no men at home, so I should come back later. So I said that I wanted to speak to them, not their menfolk. They protested, saying that only the men knew what was happening. Finally, the oldest woman, there were just three, a woman and her two daughters-in-law, said she would call in some more women neighbors. Soon her living room was filled with women of varying ages. I was offered a cup of tea, and then one of the older women said to me hesitantly, had I visited the Muslim quarter also? And did I have a cup of tea there? Before I could respond, she said, embarrassed herself, no, there's no harm, I suppose, as long as the cup is clean. Our vegetable seller is a Muslim and he's a very nice man. In those two sentences, she said a great deal. The prejudice among many Hindus that Muslims don't observe the same standards of cleanliness as they do, that the only interaction the women had with Muslims were those who provide services. Then as the conversation warmed up, with the young women joining in to talk about the riot that had taken place, came another surprise. The older women who had seen partition believed that nothing justified communal violence. It harmed all communities, and they said all issues should be settled peacefully. The younger women, you will recall that this was around the time that the Ram Janmabhoomi movement was at its height, probably because they had not seen the misery of partition. They were all uniformly anti-Muslim. The hatred was so strong that they didn't mind disagreeing with their mothers-in-law. Till now, they had been sitting meekly, their heads covered. It was quite a revelation for me. Now, the belief that women vote in exactly the same way as their men folk dictate is simply not true. Yes, by and large, in the greater interest of the community or village, they may do so. Let me tell you two stories from the same election. One was narrated to me by a former farmer leader whose family was once aligned with Charan Singh, then with Mahinder Singh Tikayat, and now is firmly in the BJP. In the 1984 general elections, the one after Indira Gandhi was assassinated, the men folk in his village in Muzaffarnagar decided that they would all vote for Charan Singh. When the results came in, of course, Rajiv Gandhi and the Congress had won a 4/5 majority, and the constituency in which this village stood also voted Congress. Distraught, my source sought a reason in his own village. Suspicious, he sought out his own mother and asked her whom she had voted for. Pat came the reply, Indira ke chhore ke liye, for Indira's son. But hadn't the village agreed to vote for Charan Singh's party? Yes, she answered, but we women were not happy with that. We had our own meeting and decided that in this election, we would vote for once for Indira's son. The second story is from the same election and was narrated to me by Vinod Malhotra, who retired later as the Secretary to the Government of India. He was a district magistrate at Rai Bareli during the emergency. He told me that the reports he had been getting ahead of the polls was that Indira Gandhi would re-win her seat. His 28-year-old wife, who used to visit the villages to do social work, told him that Indira Gandhi would lose her own seat on the basis of her conversations with the women. Recounting the story, Mr. Malhotra said that he had dismissed his wife's report out of hand, telling her, "What do you know about elections?" But she was proved right. It was because in both cases, the women had taken a choice which was different from that of the men. And that was as way back as 1984. Quite clearly in that election, Rajiv Gandhi won his magnificent 4/5 majority on the strength of the women's vote. Shall I stop here and then maybe we can carry on with another,
Yeah, I think that was so insightful, especially that the last bits that you talked about women voting. Your own experiences about women not voting in consonance with the men of their village, which is largely what the prevailing notion is. And I think this is a good time to hop over to Kavita Muralidharan. At this point, I would also like to ask the audience that if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat box, and we will try to take it up, since this session will probably be a little shorter as it spilled over from the last. But we will try and do that. Also, I wanted to tell you that Kavita Bundelkhandi unfortunately had to drop out, and so she will not be joining us in this session at the moment. So Kavita, can I just come to you?
Yeah.
From that last point that Smita kind of talked about, our understanding of women as voters in say the south of India, and especially in Tamil Nadu, is completely different from what the prevailing notion is in the north of India, right? So what have your experiences as a journalist been covering the election, especially, given that Tamil Nadu, I mean, there are two things. There is a large political sort of mobilization of women, and especially women and from a caste lens also. But also we see very few women making it to the political, to state houses in any of the southern states, really, as compared to the north. So can you talk us through your experiences in, say, about 3 or 4 minutes, please?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Bhanupriya. Also, congratulations to NWMI. I'm so glad to be part of NWMI in Chennai. As far as my experience is concerned, I think in Chennai, in Tamil Nadu, at least women are much more aware, and they are willing to speak, even in rural areas. When I travel to villages to cover elections, women are willing to speak on issues that concern them. So they're not really waiting for the menfolk of their families to come up and speak. And most of the issues are we had a local body election which concluded recently. So in local body election, the issues the issues that came up are basically issues that directly concern the women. It's livelihood issues, water, those kind of issues. So at least in Tamil Nadu, women are willing to speak on the kind of issues that bother them, and they see election as an opportunity, election campaign as an opportunity to kind of speak about these issues. That I've seen women telling me and telling many other journalists, telling political leaders who approach them for votes, this is the only time that we get our chance to, make our voices heard. So that is very, at least in my experience, I think that's very common among women in Tamil Nadu. I've been to rural areas where they complain about the scarcity of water and several such issues, the pollution. These have been some issues that women have been talking about. So that is one thing I wanted to say. And generally, like in the local body elections, we had 50% reservation for women. So there were lots of women councillors and mayors. Some seats were reserved for Dalit women, which I think is a very important step. So the Chennai mayor is a very young Dalit woman. She's in her 20s. But the way the media handles her is something I think that needs also to be because the kind of questions that she's new on her job, but I've seen a couple of her interviews where she speaks a lot of sense. But when you kind of keep asking her questions over and over again, she fumbles, like many of us tend to do under some stress, and they make it a point to say that women cannot do this. She's too young to handle this position and all. But over, it's been 2 weeks now, and I see her doing quite well. So there are these kind of roadblocks also that women had to face when they are trying to kind of make themselves heard as part of the process or outside of it, like as journalists. So I think I'll stop here and wait for.
Yeah, I also wanted to ask you, and if you can quickly tell, as your experience as a journalist, have you seen that shift happening in the coverage of issues from a gender lens in the south of India, or has it always been there? And
no. See, in interior rural Tamil Nadu, there are people who still believe that a leader called M.G. Ramachandran, who died in 1984. They still believe that he is alive because he was hugely popular in Tamil Nadu. And he was very iconic leader. So there are older women who refuse to believe that he did. So he is dead. So from that point to discussing various issues, I think it's very broad based. They also sometimes they also speak about leaders. They are very fond of MGR, Jayalalitha, or Kalaignar Karunanidhi, and they speak on leaders. They willingly speak on leaders. On the other side, they are also speaking on issues. So this contrast is quite evident in Tamil Nadu. So I've seen such things. And yes, but they are very vocal about issues. Like I've been to Ramanathapuram, Thoothukudi, where there was this protest against pollution of a factory and all. So they have been very vocal about it. And whenever elections come, they make it a point to make it an electoral issue also. So, and in most cases, women lead such struggles. So that also helps. So when an election is around the corner, they tend to make it an electoral issue. So they get some kind of either attention or some kind of relief.
Right. Thank you, Kavita. Can I move to Ninglun now? Ninglun, one of the things, again, in the mainstream media that we keep hearing about when it comes to elections, especially in the northeastern part of the country, is this narrative often that so there are these societies which are very women-centric or matriarchal and so on. But if you look at the representation of women in local bodies or even in state houses and to the parliament, and so that's where it's very abysmal. This is what I saw even during the Manipur elections. Story after story focused on that. So as a reporter who's been looking at Manipur specifically, and I don't want to generalize asking you to speak about the entire region, but be great if you can speak about the entire region from your experience, but specifically from Manipur, let's say, do you see that, how do you see the narrative has shifted or has it stagnated?
Yeah, hi. Thank you for having me here on this special occasion and speaking about election, the just concluded election happening in the state. The narrative is that, yes, definitely there are very, very less women in, not only in Manipur, across Northeast and even in India. But of course, the coverage wise, if you say there is a lot of coverage, especially this time, a lot of media coverage on the elections and especially focus on women representation. But fortunately, this time we had more than 16 candidates and 5 women came successful. 5 women were elected this time. And among them, there were 3 women, tribal women from the hills. And it is really momentous and historic in one way. Of this recent trend, I have seen that there is a lot of discussion, a lot of talks, a lot of writings, and even the television media covering about very few women representation in, especially in Manipur, when we say it is a land of the Perapaibis, is the land of the women's war, the historic women's war, the historic Imas market. Yeah, the narrative goes on to that trend, and then there will be a lot of discussion and writings on why women are not represented in the assembly or the parliament. And the discussion will follow on what are the challenges and why women are still behind and they were left as mere voters. The discussion, there are a lot of discussion happening this time, and there were a lot of talks about women representations. This is also because the civil society, the women's group has become more vocal about women representation in the state assembly and the reservation issues. But the coverage is mostly on women standing in long queue, women coming out as in groups, or more number of women voters, and mostly on the visual representation of women, colorful women coming out. And even if they interview women candidates, for instance, the lens will be on some high profile candidates with some so-and-so background, and then not much into the geographical rural areas. That still remains there. And the discussion also and the writings also focus more on challenges. Women are not coming out in a state like where there are more number of women voters. I think it is there right now.
Right. Thank you, Ninglun. I was particularly amused by what you said about the visual representation of the election coverage of colorful clothes and the mother's market and so on and so forth, which is what I've seen also. And let me just move to Babita, but before I do, just a reminder to everyone watching that if you have any questions on this important panel, please put it in the Q&A box here, and we'll pick it up at the end of in the last 15-20 minutes of the session. Babita, welcome to this panel. मैं आपसे ये पूछना चाहूंगी कि मैंने आपका इलेक्शन कवरेज ट्विटर पे फॉलो किया, और मैंने सबसे पहले तो मुझे काफी लगा कि कितना कास्ट और जेंडर का जो इंटरसेक्शन है वो कितना मिसिंग है ऑलरेडी हमारे नैरेटिव में। लेकिन मुझे ये भी आई थिंक ये एक हार्टनिंग चीज भी है कि नए आउटलेट्स जो हैं वो और यंग जर्नलिस्ट, आप जैसे यंग जर्नलिस्ट इस कमी को पूरा कर रहे हैं। आपने एक पूरा एक आउटफिट बनाया ताकि अम्बेडकराइट लेंस से, कास्ट लेंस से ये इश्यूज को देखना चाहेंगे। तो आप अपने अनुभव से बताइए कि आपके क्या फ्रस्ट्रेशंस रहे हैं कि मीडिया कैसे कवर करता है इलेक्शंस, स्पेशली फ्रॉम अ जेंडर एंड कास्ट लेंस, और आपने फिर ये शुरू कैसे किया, क्यों किया, और आपका इस रिपोर्टाज ये उत्तर प्रदेश में और पंजाब में जब आपने रिपोर्ट किया इस बार, तो ये एक्सपीरियंस में आपको क्या देखने को मिला? आप म्यूटेड हैं बबीता, आप अनम्यूट कर लें।
आपको मेरी आवाज आ रही है?
हाँ, आपकी आवाज आ रही है।
पहले तो NWMI को बहुत बहुत बधाई। 20 साल हो गए उन लोग काम करते करते, और बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया आप सभी का। आपने हमें बुलाया और इतने महान अनुभवी पैनलिस्ट बैठे हैं, उनके सामने मैं अपनी बात रख पा रही हूँ। तो जैसा कि आपने सवाल किया कि जेंडर बेस, तो फ्रस्ट्रेशन, हाँ वो मैं कहूंगी कि ये आपने बिल्कुल ठीक कहा कि फ्रस्ट्रेशन जो है वो दिखना चाहिए। क्यों? क्योंकि मेन मीडिया जो है जिसको हम लोग, और वहां पर जब हो तो वहां पर महिलाओं से जुड़े मुद्दों पर बात करने के लिए नहीं थे। हम कितने साल हो गए, आप देखते आ रहे होंगे कि जो रिपोर्टर है वो ज्यादातर मेल रिपोर्टर हैं, और हम जब रिपोर्ट करने गए थे, मैं अपने खासतौर पर अपने आउटलेट की बात करूं, तो वहां पर क्या होता था कि हम अपना माइक लेकर अगर भीड़ में खड़े हैं और 4 महिलाएं हमारे साथ, हम उनसे बात करें, तो जो आसपास की भीड़ होती
बबीता,
थी,
आपको मैं थोड़ा इंटरप्ट करना
ज्यादातर
चाहूंगी।
पुरुष कहते दीजिए, हमें माइक दीजिए, हम बात करेंगे। तो मैं, जी आवाज आ रही है?
अगर आपके आवाज में थोड़ा लैग हो रहा है, तो अगर आप अपना वीडियो ऑफ करके बात करना चाहेंगे तो ये भी ठीक रहेगा।
ठीक है। अभी मेरी बात आ रही, आवाज आ रही है आपको?
बहुत स्पष्ट।
जी, तो मैं एग्जांपल दूंगी उत्तर प्रदेश के आगरा की, जहां पर एक कॉलोनी है, इंदिरा कॉलोनी। वहां पर जब हम रिपोर्ट करने गए तो माइक देखते ही एकदम भीड़, महिलाओं की भीड़ मैं कहूंगी, वो आई हमारे पास और उन्होंने कहा कि हम बात करेंगे। और हमने उनसे उनके मुद्दे जाने की, सबसे बड़ा मुद्दा क्या है। तो उन्होंने हमें, मतलब जब उन्होंने हमसे बोलना शुरू किया तो उन्होंने कहा कि आप टीवी मीडिया से हैं, क्योंकि टीवी मीडिया जो है वो यहाँ नहीं आता है। तो हमने कहा नहीं, हम टीवी से नहीं है, हम अपना यूट्यूब चलाते हैं, हमारा वेबसाइट है। तो उन्होंने कहा कि हम, हमारी जो सबसे बड़ी दिक्कत है ना, वो यहाँ पर पानी की समस्या है। और ये हमने अपनी रिपोर्ट में दिखाई कि किस तरह से एक बुजुर्ग महिला अपने सर पर घड़े में पानी रखकर लेकर जा रही है, और ये चीज 3 मटके, मतलब उनके बच्चे भी, पोते पोती भी सर पे मटका लेकर चल रहे थे, और उस पूरी कॉलोनी में घुटनों तक पानी भरा हुआ था। जो वो अम्मा थी, उनकी एज 70+ में होंगी, उन्होंने सर पर मटका पानी का भर के गंदे पानी में लेकर जा रही थी। और उनका कहना था, मैं जब उनसे पूछ रही थी तो उनका कहना था कि हमारे यहाँ समस्या सुनने को कोई नहीं आता है। टीवी मीडिया तो बाहर बाहर से दिखा देगी कि देखो उत्तर प्रदेश इतना साफ है, लेकिन जो असली मुद्दे हैं वो हमसे जानने नहीं आते हैं। एक इंसिडेंट ऐसा हमारे साथ हुआ था। एक प्रोटेस्ट मैं कवर करने गई थी, वो सफाई कर्मचारियों की प्रोटेस्ट थी। तो वहां पर उस पूरी जो प्रोटेस्ट को लीड कर रही थी वो एक महिला थी। तो मैंने उनसे जाना कि यहाँ पे महिलाओं के मुद्दे क्या है। तो तो उन्होंने कहा कि हम जो सफाई कर्मी हैं, हमको एक तो हम महिलाएं हैं, हमारे साथ सबसे बड़ी दिक्कत होती है माहवारी की, कि हमें माहवारी के टाइम पर अगर जो हमारा जो जिसको हमने ठेका जिसके अंडर हम काम कर रहे हैं, उसको पता चल जाए कि इसको पीरियड्स हो रहे हैं, तो वो उससे डबल काम लेता था, उसको रेस्ट करने नहीं देता था, उसको पानी तक पीने नहीं देता था। अगर उसने पानी पी लिया तो क्या कहते हैं, वो उसका हाफ डे लगा देता था। और हमने उनसे ये भी सुना कि 6-6 महीने 7-7 महीने प्रेग्नेंट महिलाओं से वो ठेला खिंचवाते थे, और पता चल जाए कि इनका डिलीवरी का टाइम नजदीक आ रहा है तो नहीं, आप फावड़े से खुदाई करो, आप सर पे मैला ढो, और बहुत सारी चीजें। और ये मेन स्ट्रीम मीडिया आपको नहीं दिखाएगा। और क्यों नहीं दिखाएगा? क्योंकि वो दलित कम्युनिटी से आते हैं, वो बहुजन समाज है जिसको बता दिया गया है कि आपका तो काम है मैला ढोना, आपका काम है सफाई करना। तो हमने ऐसे मुद्दे कवर किए हैं। पंजाब की मैं बात करूं, पंजाब में भी यही सिचुएशन हमने देखी। वहां पे हम लोगों ने मतलब कैमरे पे कोई बोलने को राजी नहीं था, क्योंकि एक डर का माहौल था कि अगर हम बोलेंगे तो हमारी नौकरी खतरे में आ जाएगी। तो ये सारी चीजें हमने देखी। और आप मेन स्ट्रीम मीडिया की बात करें तो वहां पर जो अभी महिलाएं हैं वो एक विशेष समुदाय की महिलाएं हैं, और वहां पर अभी आदिवासी बहुजन महिलाएं हैं ही नहीं, दूर दूर तक नहीं है। और जब वो नहीं होंगी तो उनकी बात रखने के लिए कोई नहीं होगा, और जब उनकी बात नहीं रखी जाएंगी तो लोगों को पता कैसे चलेगा कि समाज में जो तबका है, बहुत बड़ा तबका है, वो किस स्थिति में जी रहा है। हम अपने आउटलेट के जरिए, हम अपनी रिपोर्ट के जरिए उन बहुजन समाज की आवाज को दिखाते हैं, उनके दर्द को दिखाते हैं। और ये सारी चीजें हैं सोशल मीडिया के जरिए आज बहुजन समाज अपनी बात रख पा रहा है। क्या चाहिए? एक मोबाइल चाहिए, उसमें डेटा चाहिए। अगर कहीं पे कुछ होता है तो वो वीडियो बनाते हैं और उसको ट्विटर पर, सोशल मीडिया जितने भी हैंडल्स हैं जितने वो यूज कर पा रहे हैं उस पर शेयर करते हैं। और मेन स्ट्रीम मीडिया की जब जरूरत बन जाता है, जब बहुजन समाज उसको ट्रेंड करवाता है, जब बहुजन समाज उसको सरकार पर थोप देता है, तब मेन स्ट्रीम मीडिया उस मुद्दे को उठाती है, और तब जाके वो कहीं मतलब 1-2 रिपोर्ट में वो पेश करते हैं। तो ये सारी चीजें हमने उत्तर प्रदेश चुनाव, पंजाब चुनाव में देखी है। और अगर मैं अपनी आउटलेट की बात करूं तो एक दलित महिला होने के नाते हमने ये चीज देखी है कि मेन स्ट्रीम मीडिया भी हम लोगों को टेकिंग फॉर ग्रांटेड ले लेता है, अरे यार इनका क्या होगा, इनको कौन देखेगा। लेकिन ये चीज है कि मेन स्ट्रीम मीडिया अब लोगों तक जो पहुंच रहा है, कहीं ना कहीं अब उनका भरोसा भी धीरे धीरे कम होता जा रहा है। क्योंकि हम जहां जहां गए हैं, कई जगह पे तो हमें ऐसी महिलाएं मिली हैं जो इतना रोती हैं और कहते हैं कि हम टीवी पे नहीं आ पाएंगे, आप हमारी बस खबर पहुंचा दीजिए, ऊपर मतलब जो अधिकारी बैठे हैं उन तक हमारी खबर बस पहुंचा दीजिए, हम और कुछ नहीं चाहते आपसे। तो ये सारी चीजें हमने देखी हैं, और मैंने अपनी रिपोर्ट जितनी भी मैंने की है उनमें मैंने दिखाई है।
Thank you, Babita. बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया. And for everyone watching, The Voice is on all social media channels. Please follow them, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and so on. So I think, given the interest of time and everything, we will really have to kind of, again, to the audience, if they have any questions, please put them in the Q&A session, Q&A box here. So I wanted to ask you that, we've talked about the gender lens in terms of, the representation and so on. But what is coming out, especially speaking with, listening to all of you talk, is also the issues that become, that are articulated in forms that don't mentioned in the national media or any other form of media, especially from a gender lens. तो मेरा सवाल सबसे ये होगा कि just I would like to ask everyone that how do we make these issues that these women are articulating as issues that should become the center of elections and therefore policy making, for example. So if I can start with you, Smita, in 2 minutes, if you can tell us that, then.
I was just listening with great interest to what Babita said. And, I think it's absolutely tragic that the reporter's caste should decide what they cover and what they think is important. That this is still happening. It is tragic. But I just want to take you back, because, I mean, she triggered a memory in the 2004 election when, Atal Bihari Vajpayee was still in power, and then the Congress-led government came into power. During that election, I remember I went to Bundelkhand, and sadly, Kavita Bundelkhandi is not here. And somebody had told me, you must go and meet these women from Khabar Laheria. And I went, and it was an absolutely, eye-opening experience. But I do remember that there was a poem that was part of an editorial that they had written in Bundelkhandi. I mean, I don't speak Bundelkhandi, but I do remember that there were 2 lines in it. That was a time, if you remember that election, the BJP was talking about India shining. And, it was, very proud of its super highways and so on. And they, in that little poem, they had written that people talk about shining India and these super highways, etc. But where we live, the roads are so bad that if you fall down, you will not only break your teeth, you won't even be able to find the remnants of those broken teeth. And that was a huge insight, which helped me understand that election, because that was the election, if you remember, Vajpayee lost. Nobody believed that he was going to lose that election. And one of the reasons was that India was not shining in those dark corners of the country, which the ladies of Bundelkhand were able to capture so wonderfully in that little editorial. So I feel that, that, national and local media outlets can collaborate. I don't see why not. Because first of all, there's a shortage of money, as I have flagged earlier. So this would be a great way, because national outlets provide perhaps a national perspective. But the local outlets, they have their ear to the ground. They give you the little picture, which is so very, very important to understanding the larger picture. So big media outlets, I think, could enter partnerships with local outlets, share reporters and stories. And I think both would definitely benefit from the process. And at a time, when budgets in newspaper, whether it's mainstream media, whether it's digital media, and for those who are the brave ones who are, have their own YouTube channels and so on, I think it would be wonderful. And I just like to conclude by saying that ultimately journalists are the key contributors to shaping the public narrative at any given point of time. And this inevitably influences both public opinion and public policy. And ordinary women make up half of that. These are the people who are at the heart of the story, and they are the ones for whom governments and policies are made. And so it is important, not just because we need to have the women's voice, it is important for the entire society. Thank you.
Thank you, Smita. Can I ask Ninglun, how do you think, what else do you think from where you are situated? What are the issues you would like to see covered, and with what kind of sensitivity and with what kind of lens when it comes to women and gender diverse persons also? What is missing, and how can we correct all of this in the coming years?
Yeah, like Smita said, yeah, one way could be a collaborative effort. Definitely that will help a lot. And yeah, in terms of coverage, yeah, I often see and feel that a lot of rural area needs to be covered, especially women in the local, the rural areas. Like, for example, if you talk about Manipur, all the journalists will hang around the state capitals. And of course, the logistic is difficult, yeah. But like, for example, if you interview a candidate, for instance, and why not ask a woman from the rural area who is contesting speak? Or, for example, rather than either you cover it in a very the tragedy or the misery, that is one thing. But there are a lot of women party workers also nowadays. So if we let them speak, what are they doing? Or whether what actually are they doing, in the sense, what kind of changes, what kind of beliefs do they have, for instance, party workers, for instance, rather than just a general or a roadside interview with one woman or with one vendor or something. Like, of course, we can cover the misery or the other side of the stories, but also those women who really come out now as party workers or as a political activist, for instance. Yeah, that would also be really interesting.
Right. No, I think that's a very important point, because this whole, I've when in my own sort of research, I've found a lot of party workers being women. Actually, women form a bulk of party workers, really. But actually, when you see their representation in either stories or what they're facing, a lot of them face a lot of harassment, etc. Of that is just missing in terms of in terms of news, really. I think they're there in research reports and so on. Kavita, again, coming back to Tamil Nadu, it's been one of the states where, like you said, women party workers, especially during Jayalalitha's time, they formed like the real core of Jayalalitha's sort of base, right? Mobilization base, really. And and you did talk about how they, women do tend to articulate quite a lot in Tamil Nadu. And I'm not homogenizing the South again, because each state is different, but specifically from Tamil Nadu's point of view, what from where you are situated, what do you see the future of the gender lens reporting from where you are? What else can you do in the south of India, or rather in Tamil Nadu, that's not already done? You're muted, Kavita.
Yeah. Sorry. So basically, I think when we speak about women party workers, they are invisibilized. Like, they form the core of any party, be it like in the last elections, last Lok Sabha elections, last assembly elections, women electorate was higher than the male electorate in Tamil Nadu. That was an important point, but their problems, and in terms of being party workers, they had to struggle more than a male party worker to even attend a party meeting or election meeting, which gets over by 10 in the night, or if it's a party meeting, it might take a bit longer. But they kind of brave various struggles, and they do all, they suffer a lot, and they still come to do party work. But as you said, they have not been given their due. You have a women's wing in every party, and women's wing and some of them try to kind of experiment with it. But then the women's wing has a set of duties that it's supposed to do. So generally organizing meetings and all. But and in terms of campaign also, you can see a lot of women party workers. It happened in local body elections. Also because participation was higher this time in the local body elections, you could see lots of women coming to the fore campaigning for party people, the electors and all. So in terms of reporting, I think in Tamil Nadu, as far as Tamil Nadu is concerned, there are many efforts to kind of look at things through gender lens. But I don't know, but I have a feeling that I could be wrong, but I have a feeling that it's been too common. Like, you have a particular set of stories that you do when women are in terms of gender lens, like what are their issues, and it's not going beyond that. What are the issues of the women? These are some common stories. The only story is whom will the women vote for? Women vote bank is considered to be a very important vote bank. So who will women vote for, and what are their issues, are some common stories. Otherwise, if there is a controversy, if some politician makes a very misogynistic comment, it becomes a story. Otherwise, beyond that, nothing is being actually looked at. But when you travel into, like I travel to not for covering, but just out of curiosity, during the Lok Sabha elections, I went to a village near Pondicherry. It's a Tamil Nadu village, but it's near Pondicherry, which also has a sizable tribal population, Irulas. So the Irula hamlet within the village is very small. Their houses are too small with thatched roof, and there are two families. The number of members are two families living in one house. But when I spoke to the women, they are very eager to get education. So access to education is one of the issues that they were very vocal about. So these kind of issues are not being discussed in the media. You know, that women, they speak about lots of issues. It's not just about gender, but education, which they think will help them go to the next level or achieve whatever cannot be achieved from their caste and social location. So these kind of issues, I have not seen any mainstream media or maybe very rarely covering it. So I think this needs to be discussed more. It's not just about an issue that women speak. I mean, it's not just when a problem comes up that women speak. It's not just about pollution or a water problem. They also speak about livelihood issues of things like education and all. And these needs to be kind of brought into the mainstream narratives, which I think is very important.
Right. Thank you so much. But मैं आपसे क्विकली पूछना चाहूंगी, अगर आप जल्दी बता सकें 2 मिनट में कि आप I'm sorry to rush you, but you know, so ये जो आप अगले आप अभी आपने शुरू की वॉइस मीडिया विद, जैसे आपने कहा कि ये फ्रस्ट्रेशन है ऐसा, तो आगे आप क्या देखना चाहेंगी और किस तरह से आप चाहेंगी कि यू नो अगले इलेक्शंस में बोथ कास्ट और जेंडर आने वाले इलेक्शंस में ये फिगर करे, और किस तरह से हम कोलैबोरेट कर सकते हैं बाकी मीडिया हाउसेस के साथ, या ताकि जो आप जैसे यू नो इनिशिएटिव्स हैं वो उनके आवाज दूर दूर तक पहुंचे. I think Babita is frozen. Maybe we'll allow Babita to come back. There are 3 questions that we have in the question box, and I thought I should take it up. So Triveni Mathur asks, the recent elections did have women-centric issues, whether on women voters or candidates, although the visual representations, as mentioned by one panelist, Ninglun, did have a stereotypical treatment. Did women journalists notice any change in how the management of media houses treat these women's stories, particularly if men were decision makers in terms of coverage and positioning of news? I think, you know, Smita probably might be the best person to take this up. Or anyone else wants to pitch in, please feel free.
I really don't think the treatment was any different, frankly. So,
okay.
I mean, the digital media does try, you know, some of them, they try and do focus on other areas, but I think the mainstream media, you know, I haven't really seen any dramatic changes.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, can I just say one thing? You know, the one big issue, it wasn't really a big issue, it became a big issue, sort of headline news, because Priyanka Gandhi said that 40% of the tickets would be given to women by the Congress party in UP. And that became like a big issue. But on the ground, it was it really bombed. It was a total failure. And I don't think people reported really on the fact. I mean, she got all the headlines when she was talking about this 40%. Because for instance, I spoke to a young college student in Muzaffarnagar, and I said that, aren't you very pleased that the Congress has offered 40% of the tickets to women, and don't you think that's a great idea? And she said, you know, the girl who was on the poster must have been an important girl, but they denied her a ticket. And so she joined the BJP. So, you know, what kind of a joke is this? So it's, you know, social media, everybody's very alert. Everybody's watching you very carefully. And this is not because women don't want to join politics. Because in 2012, when I had done an actual survey of about 100 women, just on voting patterns, I remember one of the things that they told me that many of them had actually campaigned. These were just ordinary women. They were not party related women. They were all admirers of Mayawati, whether they were voting for her or not. This was at the time when she was at the height of her powers. And they all said that they would like to join politics if they could get an opportunity. So it's not that there aren't women on the ground who want to join politics. But I just think that the Congress just completely failed, and I haven't seen any story capturing why it failed.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that, Smita. There's while there is another sort of question that I would like to take up. There is one request from one of our audience members that if all of you could please share your Twitter handles in the chat, probably they'd like to follow you and your work. So that would be great if you can type in your Twitter handles. There is a question from Divya Gautam who asks, what is the future of women in politics, and has it changed in recent times, or still nepotism prevails in women representatives in India? I think Esther Duflo did answer some of those questions, but please, as journalists, all of you, can I start with Babita, since she logged out yeah, so आप क्या समझती हैं कि महिलाओं का क्या फ्यूचर है पॉलिटिक्स में भारत में?
जैसा आपने कहा कि क्या फ्यूचर है, अगर महिलाएं पॉलिटिक्स में आएंगी तो वो अपने मुद्दे ज्यादा बेहतर तरीके से बता पाएंगी। जैसे कविता मैम ने कहा कि कांग्रेस ने 40% महिलाओं को टिकट दिया, लेकिन वो काम नहीं कर पाया। हम लखनऊ में थे और हम रिपोर्ट कर रहे थे कि जो कांग्रेस में होता है, मतलब क्या आप लोग समझते हैं? तो अरे इन्होंने तो नारा दिया है लड़की हूँ लड़ सकती हूँ, बताओ ये तो पहले ही हार गई हैं। अब आप बताइए, अब 40% महिलाओं को टिकट दिया है, वो क्या बोलेंगी? उनको क्या करना है? घर में जाएंगी, रोटी सब्जी बनाएंगी और बैठ जाएंगी। पॉलिटिकल मुद्दों पे वो कितना बोलेंगी और उनको क्या पता है? आप देखिए ना, हम इतने दिनों से काम कर रहे हैं, हमें तो अभी तक टिकट नहीं मिला है। तो वही वाली बात है, अगर आप पहले से सोच के बैठे हैं तो फिर क्या होगा? आप मौका तो दीजिए, अब मौका देंगे तो वो अपनी बातें रख पाएंगी। और जिस तरह से मैम ने मायावती जी का नाम लिया, वो आप एक बात बताइए, वो 4 बार उत्तर प्रदेश की सीएम रही और वो एक पूरे ऐसे तबके को लेकर चल रही है, एक ऐसे तबके के साथ उनका तबका जो जुड़ा हुआ है वो बहुजन समाज, जहाँ पे महिलाओं की स्थिति आप जानती हैं। आज भी हेडलाइन क्या बनती है? दलित महिला के साथ हुआ रेप, दलित महिला की नोक पर एक ऊंची हेडलाइन ये बनती है। और आप कहते हैं कि महिलाओं का नेतृत्व कहाँ से होगा? अगर आप पॉलिटिकल में उनको आने देंगे तो अपनी बात और अच्छे से रख पाएंगी, जो उनके राइट्स हैं, जो वो और लोगों से जो उनकी, जैसे मैंने कहा कि महामारी के दौरान उनसे डबल काम लिया जाता है, तो क्या पता वो जब आए, जब सत्ता में उनकी हिस्सेदारी बराबर की होगी तो वो इन इश्यूज पे बेहतर तरीके से बात कर पाएंगी। दूसरी बात है कि चैलेंजिंग तो रहेगा कि हाँ भैया महिलाएं आई हैं और ये कहीं ना कहीं मेल डोमिनेटिंग सोसाइटी को वो खलेगा, और वो खलता ही है। तो वो अपनी बात, महिलाएं अपनी बात बेहतर तरीके से कर पाएंगी। तो क्या पता उनकी भी बात कह ले जो वो नहीं कह पाते हैं, जो कहते हैं कि अरे लड़की है, सिर्फ रोटी बनाना जानती है, आएंगी। अब देखिए ना, महिलाओं की वोट तो महिलाएं भी दे रही हैं, 50% हिस्सा उनका भी है। तो राजनीति में आने दीजिए, तब देखेंगे कि वो कितना कर पाती हैं। आप पहले से सोच के बैठेंगे तो कुछ नहीं हो पाएगा।
जी, बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया बबीता, आप अपना पर्सपेक्टिव देने का। आई वुड रियली लाइक to have carried on this discussion, because you know, elections and gender and all of that is like a pet passion of mine, but we are really running out of time and some of us had to leave as well, and so first of all, thank you so much for your patience while waiting for this panel to begin. It was really, really nice of you, and also taking part and, you know, offering us your perspective, some of them so historical that, Smita, I really think a book is in order for us all to read from your reporting experiences, as is everyone else's, I suppose. So so can I just thank all of you for your valuable time and your insights, and here's just sort of looking into the rainbow and thinking that someday the whole narrative is going to change someday. I think we can make that possible, I suppose, that we will talk more about elections and more about gender issues, and all of that will make it to the political parties' manifestos and eventually to the government, and eventually all our lives are going to change. I think that's so. Thank you so much for.
Thank you.
I think that's not the ideal, but thank
Media
you so much.
coverage has really a lot to do with women representation. Yeah, that's very true, even in Manipur.
Right. I hope we can continue to keep discussing these things offline as well and collaborate more. I would really like that to happen more of us coming together and reporting. But for the moment, thank you all so much, Smita, Kavita, Ninglun and Babita. आपके समय के लिए बहुत शुक्रिया. And yeah, be safe, take care. And for everyone else, please do check out the NWMI social media handles and also the YouTube and their website as well. Thank you.